Josh. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Josh and Ryan and IHS, as usual. I really appreciate it. So the correspondence between the two goods. Let's say Jim, our actor, faces a choice between action A and action B, and you affirm that Jim's doing A is better for humankind than his doing B. Can it be sensible then that you affirm also that Jim ought to do B rather than A? And I'd suggest that no, we just don't think that way. It's not the way our whole culture, our whole systems of thought work. Cultural evolution seems to have organized our thinking such that we strive to make the good of the whole correspond to good conduct, or the highest ought, or what we approve of. So these are the two goods of my title, the good of the whole and good conduct. I just want to dwell more about their relationship. In saying there's a correspondence here, it's like we strive to make them correspond. We are, what I'm asking you to become conscious of is that you basically choose to embrace a whole system of thought where both of these are wings, two different wings, if you like, of ethics. And you're going to, and your project in ethics is to make them correspond. And you do that by adjusting each wing, you know, as your understanding of the world and wisdom improve. That's just how it's understanding. Realize that when we say good of the whole, it's understanding of the good of the whole. When we say good conduct, it's your understanding of good conduct. And those are what you keep advancing, we hope, to bring about greater correspondence. You're like wedded to the idea of the two goods corresponding. So here again are the two goods. Now, let's think about Jim as this person acting. And again, who is this person understanding? Let's just call her Mary. I mean, it could be Jim thinking about his own conduct, you know, but let's just make Mary the understander here, as it were. So she's the one who's striving to bring about greater correspondence between her understanding of each of these two goods, okay? So the good of the whole, of course, but this is just a symbol here I'm going to use sometimes for corresponding, this little symbol here for correspondence. Okay, what have we got here? The good of the whole is expressed in many different ways in our culture. Here are some of them. You could add more, cost-benefit analysis, you know, and so on. I am going to use the term beneficial quite a bit to capture all this, or beneficialness, okay? And then on the good conduct side, these are some of the words we use, in life and in thought. I'm going to dwell maybe particularly on the word propriety for this, proper conduct, if you like. And these are the two names we're acquainted with for approaches, each of which focus on one or the other. The consequentialism focuses on this one, right? And the deontology focuses on this one. Now realize that deon is duty in Greek, okay? So good conduct is, are you doing your duty? You've got some set of duties for behaving properly. There's properly. And so deontology is kind of focused on doing those duties. Okay. So this is another set of terms we have for, as it were, these two wings. Now, the proposal here is not to elevate consequentialism over deontology, nor is it to elevate deontology over consequentialism. It's to say that we embrace both and we work with both, and again, make those adjustments for greater correspondence. spiral is really the best way to think about the matter. So we've got Mary here. So it's Jim's conduct, and Mary is considering or understanding Jim's conduct. And so we're picking up here in loop I, we pick up in a story, as it were. This is really a story of Mary's life because she's the understander here. And so she's got a notion of the propriety of Jim's conduct as she saw it, And, she's continuing to mature, Mary. I'm not saying she changes wildly as she goes through time, but her understandings and outlook mature and develop. And pondering this, seeing this, will feed into her sense. Now we're starting another loop, I+1, of beneficialness to the whole of humankind. And so this influences and feeds into this, like what is good for human beings and how is good advanced, okay? So the beneficialness of whatever it is that Jim was doing. And this understanding is going to feed into, as she continues to reflect, contemplate things, learn things, a new sense of propriety, not wildly new. We shouldn't figure it all. It might be really quite the same, but propriety I+1. So those are the deons, the duties, proprieties, and so on. Okay, so this is what it is. This is what it's like. Mary's mind or soul is hovering above all of this. These are different moments, phases that she's processing. Each loop has a distinction, but it's not a strong demarcation because just like with a Mobius strip, like the one side feeds into the other, and that's just the way it is. It's not foundationalist. It won't satisfy a foundationalist urge or mentality. And I say, get used to it. This is the way people like Adam Smith actually thought, and I think work best. Now, this is a sense of upwardness. The spiral is, we hope, coming up from the page. So as Mary progresses here through the loops, diachronically, we hope it's upward in wisdom and virtue. So absolute guarantee of that, but okay. Now, it is worth thinking about God in all of this, or a God-like being, an allegorical being, which I call joy. And what's important here is what they share in common. So I speak of God joy, just to bring them together. And benevolence towards the whole of humankind, a universal benevolence, and super knowledgeable, kind of like we're accustomed to thinking about God. So this is actually important in Smith's whole ethical framework and the patterns of his thought. It's very much patterned after benevolent monotheism. It's very much kind of Christianity continued in a way, or broadened, so that you can actually be kind of allegorical about it rather than strictly theistic. So what God joy finds beautiful, because God joy is benevolent, is the good of corresponds to the good of the whole. And your duty is to win her, I say her, approval, make me proud of you, by advancing the good of the whole. And, that's when we think about what we ought to do, right? Now, I want you to realize that the word ought comes from the word owe. Ought used to mean owe, or it used to be a tense, of owe. Like I owe someone 10 pounds. So you owe this to God joy. You owe this to God joy. That's how you should think about it. It's not that strange a word, ought, when you think of it that way. And, we disagree about what we owe to God joy, to ourselves, to our tradition, to our country, to humankind. We disagree and this and that, but, if we buy into the idea that we owe some such being something, then it's just a disagreement about what it is, just like we can disagree about how fast a comet is flying or something. Okay. So that's that your chief duty is to advance the good of the whole. It sounds awful oppressive, but realize that the whole includes you. You are a part of the whole. And so your health, comfort, and enjoyment of day-to-day activities is part of the good of the whole. And indeed, you are not better fit to do anything than to tend to your health, comfort, and enjoyment of day-to-day activities. And you're not necessarily that well fit to do anything else that contributes to the whole. And furthermore, no one else out there is better fit than you to tend to your own health, comfort, and enjoyment of day-to-day activities. So Smith's philosophy, a big part of Smith's philosophy, is to morally authorize a healthy focus on the local, you know, you, your family, your local concerns, and so on. Pursuit of honest income. Okay. So it's not as oppressive as you might think. You got to think about the richness of these concepts, how they can become very rich. Now, I say she's universal, God, joy, but she's also historically sensitive. So she sees all possible worlds, all possible histories. And so whereas generally speaking, she'll say, like, let's say all these are matters of should you steal the bread? She'll say, here, don't steal the bread, don't steal the bread, don't steal the bread, don't. Oh, here, this is a very exceptional situation. Yeah, steal the bread. So there is, you know, deviations and allowances for circumstance, for time and place, for custom, and so on. But it's all one huge view, you see. It's still one huge view. So in that sense, it's still universal, or if you like, absolute. Now, we don't have any access, you know, we don't have great access to this. This is, you know, what we debate and discuss and explore is like, oh, what do you do here? And what do you do here? And what do you do here? But I'm just saying, not only does the Smithian approach transcend a demarcation, a hard demarcation between consequential and deontological, it transcends or dissolves a hard demarcation between absolutism and relativism. Okay. So this make me proud of you is kind of a platitude. You know, how do I advance the good of the whole? What is the good of the whole? What advances the good of the whole? So what do I do? So it's an awful lot to think about. And like this guy says here, we may want to include more specific instructions. And so this is where all the stuff about propriety and learning from social experience, examples, social experience and practice, the theory of moral sentiments, this is all our way of getting more specific instructions, you could say. We're raised up through life, through family and society. We are social beings. And we pick up all of these specific instructions in this sense. He calls it the great school of self-command. And so this is kind of like the book of instructions in the book of nature, you could say, but it's a kind of society. And so you need all of the deontology side of things. You need the virtue ethics side of things. You need to think about who is worth emulating, who is worth admiring, who is worth shunning, who are good examples, who are bad examples, because that's all how you cope with this otherwise huge challenge and platitudinous, you know, request of serve the good of the whole. Okay. Now, there's another way of kind of showing this, which I think is useful. So beneficialness, it corresponds because God joy is universally benevolent to God joy's approval. And Mary is hoping that her own sense of approval, her own moral faculties, moral judgment corresponds to beneficialness. And so what Smith does in part 4 of TMS is that he says, but see, what she really relies on as she goes through life is our senses of propriety, senses of what are the duties, what are the, good manners, good rules, good modes of conduct. And so she develops these through practice and habit and learning and so on. But the point is, again, you see the correspondence here that I'm talking about, the correspondence between the two goods, again, which were shown here in the spiral thing. I'm very big on spiral. I think maybe I've already had this slide here of using spirals in ethics, epistemology, and virtue. Now, I want to make one clarification. I'm going to give an anecdote. So suppose you go vacationing on this Norwegian island, and for whatever reason, you're throwing rocks over a wall, large rocks that could really hurt somebody if they happen to be over on the other side of the wall, and you can't see. It's a big rock wall, and you can't see. And you're carelessly, recklessly throwing rocks over the wall. Now, if Godjoy sees you doing this, she's definitely going to disapprove. I mean, you just don't do that. It's careless. There could be someone there, or even if you don't think someone's there, you don't hear someone's there, there could be, and you don't carelessly throw these large rocks over walls. Now, there is, however, the role of fortune in life. And I just want to point this out. It could be that you happen to be doing this in 2011 on the horrible day when there was this guy who killed 69 people on an island in Norway. And it could be, suppose that you threw the rock over the wall and you knocked him senseless before he committed his horrible deed. This would actually be good for the whole, right? So, Godjoy would be like, hey, what do you know? You just did something really good for the whole. You saved 69 people's lives. But so, strictly speaking, it's not, this is a little bit of an abbreviation, what you're looking at here. The role of fortune could create an impasse here. But if we unpack these expressions a little bit, you could say, when we're talking about this correspondence, you're making a correspondence between your understanding of what is expected to serve the good of the whole, what you should expect will serve the good of the whole, and your understanding of good conduct. So that takes care of those kind of the role of fortune, because strictly speaking, it could happen that bad conduct by some wild fluke does actually advance the good of the whole. But since it's way beyond the ken of human consideration and understanding, it's still bad conduct. I mean, you don't get credit for just by fluke, killing or taking out a killer, right? Okay, I just wanted to say that just to clarify what this is really. So you see, all you have is you've got to use your conscience, and you've got to use your knowledge. You must do what you feel is right, of course. So, it's not always going to, your conscience is not actually always going to be a good guide. Your conscience can be quite flawed. Your conscience is only a representative of Godjoy. It's not necessarily a good representative. It could be a quite bad representative, but you got to go that route, just as you got to go with what knowledge is possible and reasonable. So that kind of fits in with this example about throwing the rocks over the wall. Finally, I want to quote Hume, Smith, and Bentham, just to show you that what I'm saying here it fits them. What I'm saying here about the correspondence is actually extremely natural to Western civilization. It's what's weird is that there was ever a kind of separation between deontology and consequentialism. That is a most an aberration, I would say, and we need to undo it to the extent that it's even a problem or it exists. And it seems like some people do kind of see them as quite separate and possibly in conflict. So Hume says it here in the essays. I won't go over this. He says it here in the inquiry of the principles of morals. And I make a note here about something Duncan Forbes says about this. Smith says it. He says that it's universally the case that what we are to approve of as virtuous are beneficial, useful, or agreeable. Okay, useful or agreeable. This comes right out of Hume. And that is universally the case upon the strictest examination. So he too is saying, these actually correspond. He also says this when he says the dictates of our moral faculties. Dictates you could think of as being rules or duties, senses of propriety or rules of propriety, that fits in with promoting the happiness of mankind and cooperating with the deity. The deity, again, is universally benevolent. So, we make all of these understandings work together to make them more, to sustain this, These aren't, conjectures or hypotheses. These are modes of thought. These are organons of thought. These are the way to organize your thought. And then Bentham says it too about the correspondence between what he calls utility and virtues. But notice what he says here, that if the supporter of the principle of utility should find in the banal catalog of the virtues an action which led to more pain than pleasure, he would not hesitate to regard that alleged virtue as a vice. I just want to point out that he's different. You see this, the banal catalog of virtue. So he wants to elevate this, some kind of consequentialism. It's not that the problem is not that he's putting a different standard in, it's that he's putting a different mode of thought in, and you're not going to do your consequentialism well without doing the other wing. You see, that's the failure. That's actually the failure. If you could fly with one wing, okay, but you can't. That's Bentham's failure. So I'll quit at that. And welcome any comments and reactions you have. Hey.